Hey guys, welcome back to another video and happy end of the week. My goodness, I'm so excited that it's finally the end of the week. I couldn't be more ready for the weekend. So I know that many of us are feeling the squeeze of the market right now, even more so than before because of the crazy diesel prices. We're feeling it too. So today we're going to be looking, as always, at what happened over the past week in the freight market and what we can expect for next week. Where are the good places to go? Now, if you're new to my channel, welcome. I teach about the trucking industry with a heavy focus on the spot market as well as freight market analysis. So if this is a topic that interests you, feel free to subscribe down below. Now, I know a lot of you are behind the wheel driving. You are not able to look at the data. So I did create a podcast, which will be linked down below if it's easier for you to just listen to the numbers instead of watch a video. So yes, this squeeze is happening to all of us, despite the fact that there's article after article coming out about how the market is turning, right? I cannot see it and you guys can't see it from what I know. So let's take a look at what happened with capacity, volumes, and rates over the past week and try to predict where you need to go to grab relatively better opportunities if you have a flatbed, reefer, and dry van. Ready? Let's go. Now, before I forget, this Sunday at 4:30 p.m. Eastern, I am going to be doing another live Q&A about the trucking industry, the freight market, whatnot, just this mess that we all find ourselves in. So if you have any questions or if you just want to hang out, you know where to find me. All right, let's start with capacity. And this is for this week, right? Or actually last week. So as we can see, revocations, involuntary revocations, this red line kind of stayed pretty much the same. New authorities increased. Voluntary revocations, the blue line, stayed pretty much the same. The reinstatements decreased. And one of the biggest things we are interested in is the change in the net carrier population. And as of last week, we lost about 270 carriers net. Now, this is a smaller loss than the week before. Now, what about the general market, right? So let's talk about the outbound tender volumes versus outbound tender rejections. Again, as a reminder, volumes, the blue line, show us how much freight there is in the general market. This is not just for the spot market. The rejection rates, the white line right here, this shows us how much of this general volume is actually getting rejected by contract carriers, either because they don't have capacity or they found a better alternative. There are a slew of reasons why rejections happen. But the thing you have to know and you have to remember is that rejections, those rejected loads, are pushed usually into the spot market. Now, currently, we can see that volumes have been slowly kind of going down, but rejections have been going up since around July 17th, right here, as you can see, which is good. But unfortunately, rejections are only at 3.34. This means that only 3.34% of that total freight is actually getting pushed to the spot market. And unfortunately, this is just not enough of a kick in the market's butt to start seeing those rate increases. Now, if you're interested, I do have another chart also, volumes versus rejections, just how much they changed over the past week. And we can see rejections went up by 5.4% since last week. Volumes went down by 1.4% since last week. But now, of course, let's talk about the really, really depressing news, and that is the diesel prices. So here we are. We know already, and I told you guys that since around July 10th, right here, right there, we started seeing diesel prices go up. And in the past few days or a week or so, it kind of skyrocketed, right? Currently, diesel prices are on average at $4.16 per gallon. And this is the first time we have hit over the $4 mark since May of 2023. So out of everything that is happening in the market, diesel prices are what is worrying me the most, because we already have a hard time making a profit with the current ridiculous rates out there. Now add this into the mix where the expenses are going to go up. It's going to eat away at the bottom line of pretty much all carriers. Now, just for the visual folks, here is the map, diesel map. As a reminder, green means an increase in prices, red means a decrease. This thing is green. There is not a single market that experienced a decrease or stability when it comes to diesel prices. So unfortunately, that is not the best news. Finally, we have the spot to contract rate spread, which shows us how much more contract carriers get per mile than those spot carriers. And currently, while the gap is closing, as we can see, spot carriers get 73 cents less per mile than contract carriers, which means what? Well, it means that if you're a contract carrier, you for sure are not going to be rejecting this contract rate for a better alternative on the spot market, right? Would you? I wouldn't. So that means that unfortunately, tender rejections, they happen when contract carriers have more choices, more freedom. So what has to happen in order for those tender rejections to start going up? Well, those contract carriers should either experience an increase in volume where they feel like, holy crap, now I have a ton of things to choose from, and if I reject this load, I know there are going to be 10 more like it. Or the capacity has to decrease. Now, unfortunately, we're not seeing capacity decrease at the level that it should be decreasing at the moment, and we're not seeing volumes increase. So we're in a bit of a pickle here. All right, now on to more specific data, always starting with flatbeds, starting with the spot volumes. As a reminder, blue is us right here, and the black dotted line is the 5-year average. Obviously, we see that we're below the 5-year average. This is last week, and volumes are continuing to decrease for flatbeds. The thing that is worrying me most of all is that we're kind of stepping away from the 5-year pattern at this point. While we see that volumes are supposed to decrease slightly, I think we're seeing a very sharp decrease in volumes for flatbeds. Why? I need to do a little bit more research. There are reasons for this. I just haven't done the in-depth research I like to do. Let's take a look at spot rates for flatbeds, and we can see that we are below the 5-year average again. But the good news is we actually saw a tiny little increase in spot rates last week by like a cent per mile or so. The weird thing is we're not following the 5-year pattern, which in this case is a good thing because we should see a steady decrease in spot rates. But currently flatbed averages are at $2.40 per mile for loaded miles. This does not include deadhead. Now let's take a look at the head haul index using the DAT map. For flatbeds, this will give us an idea of where there are more loads than trucks and where there are more trucks than loads. As a reminder, red is a good market area, considering it means that there are more loads than there are trucks there. It's a hot market. Blue means a bad market area. And just like last week, we see Oregon and Washington as hot markets, as well as the South for flatbeds. That pretty much doesn't really change week to week. Now, the thing that I never really mentioned, I keep forgetting to mention, is even though a market like the South, for example, is a hot market, which means that you should technically have more negotiating power. Unfortunately, or fortunately, we know as flatbed operators that the loads that are posted on the load board are pretty much always first come, first serve, Monday through Friday. Pick it up anytime you want. So these loads, there is no real sense of urgency like there would be with a reefer or even a dry van, right? And this means that shippers can hold on to those loads longer just to keep that rate low. Shippers and brokers, I suppose, we'll put them in the same box at this point. So even though there is more negotiating power, you have to remember that with flatbeds, right? There is no sense of urgency 99% of the time. Now, in terms of Oregon and Washington, yes, there really is more load volume than there are trucks. But the thing is, if you want to get a good rate per mile, I always say this, you have to stay within the West Coast. You want to leave the West Coast, you're going to take a hit. All right, now on to those reefers, starting with spot volumes. By the way, guys, I have been reading your comments that my mic is not really good. I do apologize. I did order a new one that should be coming tomorrow. So the next video will be hopefully with better sound. Anyway, reefer spot volumes. We can see that actually, which is really nice, spot volumes are following the 5-year pattern. And we saw the third consecutive week of increases in reefer loads. That is always welcome news. Now, in terms of spot rates, we can see that volumes translated, and we're following that 5-year pattern as well. There was an increase in spot rates as well. How much of an increase? Well, currently we are a little bit, it's like $2.30 per mile on average for loaded miles for reefers. But again, this is not everywhere. This is just the market average. We should be, according to the 5-year average, at around $2.50 per mile. But yeah, unfortunately, the market is just not there. So let's take a look at general reefer volumes. Now, this is not the spot market. This is the general market for reefer volumes. So as a reminder, the height of an area shows us how much volume there is in the market area in general. And the color shows us an increase or decrease from last week. Blue is good, it's an increase. Red is bad, it's a decrease. Well, for the most part, reefers saw either no change, gray, or decreases. But there were markets such as North Platte, Nebraska, which is flat, so it doesn't count. Arkansas, we can see the Memphis, Tennessee market, and maybe some random spots here, and Maryland and Delaware. But in general, reefer volumes are not doing very well. And unfortunately, we can see California. Oh, Nogales also saw a tiny little increase in volumes, but California is down. But what about tender rejections? Well, this map works in the same exact way. And we can see tender rejections increased in the Pendleton, Oregon market, which includes Grandview, Yakima, Washington, Spokane, Washington, all of Idaho, pretty much all of Nebraska. Memphis, Tennessee saw a huge increase in rejections. As you can see, it's extremely bright blue. And then again, Minnesota, portions of Minnesota, Houston, Arkansas, South Carolina, North Carolina. But yeah, the big rejections happened in Memphis, Tennessee, North Platte, and Minnesota. Everything else is kind of so-so. Now, does this mean that these are the markets you have to go to? Absolutely not. We're going to look at that in just a second. But first, let's look at the DAT map to show us the head haul. So this map tells us where there are more loads than trucks and vice versa. So for reefers, I mean, just like last week, not much changed. You have to be very strategic, I suppose. The markets are far and few between. Central and Northern California, the Grandview, Washington market, Pendleton, Oregon market, Idaho, Sioux Falls, South Dakota, portions of Indiana, upstate New York, Maine, and then the East Coast right here. But something we have to note is that these markets, even though they're hot, there are more loads than there are trucks, pretty much all of them are surrounded by cool markets, which means that reefer carriers who end up somewhere, I don't know, like somewhere here in Illinois will be deadheading to Indiana to grab a better rate per mile, right? A lot of carriers, unfortunately, they don't consider deadheading as part of their cost per mile. It's the weirdest thing. I don't understand how this happens, but this is the reality. So as people are deadheading, of course, they're skewing that load to truck ratio. Now, the question is, where do you need to be next week if you have a reefer to grab relatively better opportunities? And the key word here is relatively, right? I'm not saying that you're going to get some crazy $4 per mile anywhere right now. I'm just saying that relative to other markets, there are better areas. So for reefers, what we are looking at is we're looking to pair the height of a place, the general volume, with the rejection rate. The darker blue it is, the better, the higher the rejection rate, because more volume, more rejections, more stuff ends up on the spot market. So for reefers, Idaho, Grandview, Washington, Omaha, Nebraska, Sioux Falls market. Although the volume there is not really good, it's surrounded by Des Moines, Iowa, I believe, and Omaha, Nebraska, where rejection rates are still over 10%, right? Then we have the Memphis, Tennessee market. Now I memorized this rejection rate. It's at 25%, which is very close to what we were looking at during the Unicorn 2021 year, right? There's not a ton of volume here though, but you always have that nearby Little Rock, Arkansas market. And then of course we have California, Central California. The rejection rate here is around 6%, not great, but the volume does make up for it. The hardest part of being a reefer operator is being able to go from a good market to a good market. All right, so finally we have the dry van specific data, the poor dry van that has been taking the worst beating of them all since this market collapsed. So starting with volumes, the good news is that volumes, they did increase very, very slightly over the last week on the spot market. And we are pretty much following the 5-year average. Another piece of, it's not great news, but it's okay. At least we're not going down. Dry van spot rates they went down just slightly. Really, they didn't change much. They're following the 5-year pattern, but we're still at around $1.80 per mile, right? $1.80 per mile for loaded miles. It's ridiculous. With the diesel prices going up, it's unsurvivable, right? So I don't know how this will pan out. All I am hoping for is that these rates start following the 5-year pattern and start going up. This is the only thing we can hope for. So what about volumes for dry vans in the general market? Yikes, I'm starting to lose my voice. I don't know what's happening. Well, we can see for the most part, the map is gray and red, which means that volumes either decreased across the board or they remain the same. There are some random market areas, Oregon, Seattle, Washington, it's Portland, Oregon, Seattle, Washington, and then some random blimps of blue where there's not much volume to begin with. But yeah, for dry vans, volumes are going down, unfortunately. Now, you might be wondering, how is it possible that on the spot market, the volumes went up, but the general volume is going down? Well, because of tender rejections, right? It doesn't only depend on volume. Spot market depends on how much of the general volume ends up on the spot market. And the way it does that is by tender rejections. And the tender rejection map for dry vans is a little bit more optimistic compared to volumes. We can see that there's a lot of blue. The Seattle, Washington market, pretty much all of Arizona, Henderson, Nevada, all of Montana, Kansas, Oklahoma City, most of Texas, including Houston, Wisconsin, we have Indiana, we have North Carolina, South Carolina, upstate New York, some random places in the Midwest. So rejections are not as horrid as volumes if we look at them side by side. But this does not mean that you have to go to these blue markets, right? Where we need places where there's volume and rejection. But before we look at that, let's take a look at the head haul index. So for dry vans, you know how I said for reefers, the markets are few and far between? Well, for dry vans, it's even worse. We have Southern California, Dallas, Texas, Memphis, Tennessee, Atlanta, Georgia, Charlotte, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, Delaware, Indiana, and maybe a part of Ohio. These are parts where there are more loads than trucks. But again, just like with a reefer, they're surrounded by cool markets, out of which dry vans are going to be deadheading and just kind of skewing that load to truck ratio. So where do you have to be if you have a dry van next week? Now, the reason this is a forecast, I keep forgetting to mention it, is because the rejections that happen today are actually going to be reflected and turn into volume on the spot market only in 3 to 7 days from now. So as always, we're looking for places which are elevated volume and as dark blue as possible. The first thing that stands out to me is the Phoenix, Arizona market. Volume, and it's blue as blue can be. Now, unfortunately, the rejections are nowhere near the reefer rejections, but Arizona is at around 7% rejection right now. Now, Southern California has just under 5% rejection, but the volume is so high there that it's worth checking out, right? It balances everything out. We have the Seattle, Washington market, but I'd be careful with this one. And the reason is if you look, Seattle, Washington might be good, but look around it. Around it, it's dead. I mean, it's not even a hint of blue, and it's mostly flat, which means every carrier here is going to be deadheading to Seattle, Washington in order to try and grab those loads. And that will just destroy that rate per mile. Then we have Houston, Texas, which is interesting. Wisconsin, which is nice. It's 12% rejection here, which is good. The volume is not very high, but the rejection is there. And then we have some random markets. We have Virginia here as well, and then portions of the Midwest. Nothing fancy happening here. It's just relatively better than somewhere in Idaho, for example. So the only thing I can recommend for you, if you're a dry van operator, stay away from the Pacific Northwest. Try to stay away even from Seattle, because everyone is going to be deadheading there. And stay away from the Northeast. It's pretty dead here as well. So to summarize, carriers are still coming into this industry in large numbers every single week, which is extremely surprising given the fact that diesel prices are also now on their way up. And even though the net carrier population is decreasing week over week, it's just not decreasing by as much as you would expect, considering the fact that rates are, they are not even at the bottom anymore. They're kind of underneath the ground, and expenses keep climbing and climbing and climbing. Now, while diesel is the thing that scares me the most about the current situation, it's not even the tender rejections or the volumes or capacity, it's the diesel prices that are scaring me. Unfortunately, I know that there is nothing you can do about it except for get a really good fuel card to help you get those discounts. Now, the good news or the semi-optimistic news is that we saw that spot rates, for the most part, they either stayed the same or increased slightly. The only question is now whether this will stick or whether it's going to go down next week. But in general, the freight market does seem like it has plateaued a little bit. But the fact that diesel prices are going up, and I keep saying this, this is really, really scary. And the most annoying part is that we can't catch a break. We're always in the losing position. If the diesel prices are going down, the market is going down with it, and the rates are going down. If the market plateaus, then the diesel prices start going up. It's insane. Anyway, guys, that's it for this week's update. I hope that this information helps you in your operations, at least helps you understand where to go to get relatively better rates. For those of you planning to join me this Sunday at 4:30 p.m. Eastern for the live Q&A, I'll see you guys then. For everyone else, wishing you a great weekend, and I'll see you in the next video.